Whoever held that camera had crept along my fence line, pressing in close, as if casing the place. My stomach clenched cold. When I moved into that quiet cul-de-sac, all I wanted was peace. After 30 years breaking my back on construction sites, lungs thick with dust, foremen barking until my ears rang, I thought I'd earned it. The house I bought wasn't much by anyone's standards. 2 bedrooms, paint flaking from the siding, and a patch of yard framed by tall maples. But to me it was freedom, paid in full. No mortgage, no boss, no one holding the reins but me. The first project I tackled was building a shed at the back of the lot. Nothing fancy, cedar boards, a sloped roof, framed square and true, but it was mine. I sealed the wood until it gleamed, and when I opened the door, the sharp scent of pine rolled out like a promise. My tools hung in their place, mower tucked in the corner, all the little pieces of my life finally under my control. That shed was more than storage, it was a statement. To push that freedom further, I mounted solar panels on the roof. They caught the sun and shimmered, whispering independence with every watt. I'd checked the zoning laws, filed the paperwork, combed through county records. Every box ticked. And best of all, my deed showed the property sat just outside the HOA's grip. That was the sweetest part. I thought it meant I could breathe easy at last. But peace doesn't last where power-hungry people live. 3 weeks in, a letter landed in my mailbox. Heavy paper, the HOA's crest pressed deep into the envelope. I can still feel the weight of it in my hands. Inside, a single line glared up at me in bold, black type. Remove unapproved shed immediately or face daily fines. At first I laughed. How could they fine me? They had no claim over my land. I tossed the notice on the counter, telling myself it was a mistake. But the longer it sat there, the more it seemed to pulse like a warning. Something inside me stirred, a voice that had carried me through decades of hard labor. This wasn't a clerical error. This was the opening move. A second notice landed only days later, heavier than the first, and this time there was no pretending it was a mistake. Inside were photographs, my backyard, my shed, the solar panels glinting like blades of glass in the sun. These weren't taken from a sidewalk or street. The angles were too tight, too invasive. Whoever held that camera had crept along my fence line, pressing in close, as if casing the place. My stomach clenched cold. This wasn't about aesthetics. This was surveillance. The letter's language bit harder now. Both the shed and panels, it claimed, were unsightly violations of community standards. Unsightly. I barked a bitter laugh. I'd built houses sturdier than half the neighborhood, and my cedar shed could weather storms. Those panels weren't junkyard scraps. They were top tier, installed with the precision of an engineer. Yet to the HOA, they were blight. I called the number at the bottom. A woman answered, voice clipped and polished, rehearsed down to the syllable. I told her, steady as I could, "My property isn't under your HOA. It's right there in the county records." She paused, just a beat too long, and then delivered her line as if scripted. "All properties within Pine Hollow must conform to standards." The words slammed into me like a gavel. No debate, no reason, just decree. My grip tightened around the phone until my knuckles ached. I hung up, pulse hammering in my ears. The letters multiplied. $50 a day. 100. 250. Notices taped to my door. Envelopes stuffed into my mailbox. Even one shoved brazenly under the shed door itself, as if to stake a claim. Every time I picked one up, rage coiled hotter in my chest. My hands shook, not from fear but from fury, and one name rose again and again like a watermark across the paper. Richard. Richard, the HOA president. Neighbors muttered his name with a mix of resentment and submission. They said he patrolled Pine Hollow with a clipboard in one hand and a pen in the other, measuring grass blades, counting fence slats, docking people for shutters and siding. He didn't govern, he ruled. And now, I had done the unthinkable. I'd told him no. The shed was more than wood and nails, more than a roof over tools. It was a symbol. My refusal was the first challenge Richard had faced in years, and I could feel it in my bones. He wasn't about to let it stand. As the weeks crawled forward, the harassment grew bolder. No longer shadows in the background, but brazen intrusions I could no longer ignore. Out the window, I'd catch them. Strangers in crisp polos drifting along my property line, clipboards in hand, scribbling as though auditing my very existence. One morning, the charade snapped. A man crouched low by the fence, his camera clicking in rapid bursts, each flash of the lens like a knife prying into my life. When I threw the door open and stormed across the yard, he stammered something about documenting violations before bolting down the street, his retreat as jittery as a rat scurrying back into the dark. I started keeping the evidence. Every letter, every fine notice, every photograph, stacked inside a battered shoebox. It filled faster than I could believe. On paper, the so-called penalties now ballooned past $10,000. Legally worthless, yes, but the weight of them was real. Each envelope was another slap, each photo another trespass. To anchor myself in truth, I drove to the county clerk's office again. I laid the deed on the counter, tracing my finger over the line that proved beyond question my property lay outside Pine Hollow's grasp. I even made fresh copies, one for my truck, one for the shed, one pinned to my fridge. Logic, law, paper, all on my side. But deep down, I knew none of it mattered. This wasn't a fight over ordinances. Richard wasn't defending rules. He was defending his throne. So one evening, I stopped waiting for the storm to come to me. I walked straight into its eye. The HOA office loomed like a courthouse. Brick facade polished to intimidation, glass doors gleaming. Inside, the air smelled of leather chairs and disinfectant, cold and sterile. Behind a desk that looked more like a judge's bench than office furniture sat Richard. His silver hair was combed to perfection. His glasses perched low on his nose. His entire posture radiating authority that demanded deference. I didn't give him the chance. I dropped my deed squarely on his desk, the slap of paper echoing in the silent room. "Not in your jurisdiction," I said, every word hammered in steel. Richard leaned back, folding his hands, lips curving into the faintest smirk. His eyes glittered with something colder than malice. Certainty. "Everyone in this community follows the rules," he replied, voice slow, deliberate, dripping with contempt. My fists clenched at my sides. In that moment, I understood what this was. Not about sheds, not about panels, not about aesthetics. It was about power, and a man who could not stand the idea of someone living free, just beyond his reach. The following week, a fresh notice appeared. Not slipped under my door, not tucked in an envelope, but plastered directly across my solar panels like a warning nailed to a town gallows. The paper flapped in the breeze, ink bleeding in thick black letters, "Remove immediately." No statutes cited, no pretense of courtesy, just an order. Later that same afternoon, Richard arrived. Not a lackey, not a letter, Richard himself. He strolled up my driveway as though crossing a stage, blazer crisp, shoes gleaming like onyx. His smile carried the chill of a courtroom verdict, not a neighborly hello. He stopped at the base of my porch steps and planted his feet, posture stiff and square, like a judge about to hand down a sentence. "You'd be smart to quit while you're ahead," he said coolly. His voice was low but carried the weight of practiced authority. "Those panels aren't staying. The board has already decided. They're coming down." I pulled the folded deed from my pocket and raised it like a shield. "Not your board," I shot back. "Not your call. This is my property." His smile died, leaving behind a hard squint, pupils narrowing like a hawk's. "Boundaries," he muttered, "are flexible when the good of the community is at stake." That single word, flexible, hit me like a hammer. To him, lines on a map weren't limits. They were suggestions. Ownership wasn't a matter of law. It was whatever he declared it to be. We locked eyes, silence stretching taut between us. In that moment, it wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a test of will. At last, Richard turned sharply, his blazer cutting through the wind like a blade. Over his shoulder, he tossed one final warning, voice flat but heavy. "You'll regret being this stubborn." Long after he disappeared down the street, his words lingered like smoke in the air. That night, as the neighborhood settled into its quiet suburban hum, I wired up new motion lights, mounted extra cameras around the shed, and double-checked every lock. My gut told me Richard wasn't finished, and I had no intention of being caught off guard again. 3 nights later, the line wasn't just blurred, it was obliterated. I woke to a faint rasping sound, metal against metal, sharp enough to rouse the dogs into a low, uneasy growl. My pulse kicked hard in my chest. Grabbing a flashlight, I slipped out the back door, every step deliberate, the night air cool against my skin. Then I saw it, a pale beam flickering inside my shed, jittering across the walls like a restless ghost. My chest tightened until it hurt. I crept closer, keeping low, careful to melt into the shadows. The red light of the security camera blinked steadily above the door, recording everything. Through the narrow slats, I caught sight of him. Richard. Flashlight clutched in one hand, the broken remains of my padlock dangling from the other. He prowled through my shelves with the casual arrogance of a man sorting through his own garage, rifling drawers, lifting boxes, flipping through papers, searching for God knows what. My hands trembled with fury as I raised my phone and snapped a photo. Letters, fines, threats, those were petty games. But this, breaking and entering, that was a crime. I didn't shout. I didn't rush in. I let the camera bear witness, silent, cold, undeniable. By morning, the evidence was laid out on my desk. Frame by frame, the footage told the story. Richard's face lit by his own cone of light, his hands digging through my belongings like a thief in the night. That was the moment any illusion of compromise burned away. This was no longer about property lines or aesthetics. Negotiation was dead. From here on, the battle would be fought in court, backed by lawyers, evidence, and the full weight of the law. That afternoon, I drove into town and found myself in Martha's office, a property lawyer with eyes sharp as steel and a voice that could cut granite. She didn't waste words. She simply watched the footage twice, hands steepled under her chin. When the second replay ended, she leaned back in her chair, a sly smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Typical HOA overreach," she said coolly. "They know they have no authority. but they're banking on you cracking under pressure." I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. Cracking isn't an option for me. Her grin widened, feral, almost predatory. "Excellent. Then let's make them regret it." By the end of the week, Martha had filed a lawsuit so precise it felt like a blade. Trespassing, harassment, property damage, fraudulent fines. Every violation meticulously documented. Every shred of evidence lined up like soldiers ready for war. When Richard was served, the mask slipped. He came storming down my street in broad daylight, face blotched red, spit flying as he screamed that I'd just ruined my life. His voice cracked with rage, but I didn't flinch. I simply raised a hand and gestured toward the security camera mounted above my porch, its little red light blinking like a heartbeat. Let him vent. Let him rage. The law was on my side now, and for the first time since this nightmare began, something I hadn't felt in weeks stirred in my chest. Hope. The courtroom hummed with anticipation, the air thick with whispers and the shuffle of papers. Neighbors filled the benches, some wide-eyed with curiosity, others watching me with quiet nods of solidarity. They weren't just here for spectacle. They wanted to see David face Goliath. Then Richard arrived. Not simply walked, arrived. He strode in as though it were his coronation. Three-piece suit pressed to perfection, binder tucked under his arm like a holy text. Behind him trailed the board members, lined up in neat formation, obedient ducklings shadowing their patriarch. His lawyer, a slick-haired man with the confidence of a showman, rose first, buttoning his jacket with deliberate flair. "This man," he declared, arm outstretched, finger stabbing the air toward me, "has erected unsafe, unsightly structures that threaten the very fabric of this community." His voice rose with each phrase, designed to echo against the high ceilings. He has ignored reasonable requests, defied collective will, and jeopardized the integrity of Pine Hollow. Theatrical, practiced, every syllable polished like a performance rehearsed for weeks. I stayed still, hands folded on the table, face unreadable. Martha leaned close, her whisper sharp enough to cut through the attorney's booming cadence. Let him dig his own grave. And dig he did. They paraded glossy photos of my shed and solar panels as though they were exhibits in a crime. They unfurled charts of alleged aesthetic damage, bold arrows and percentages meant to impress the crowd. Finally, they presented a map, lines redrawn, boundaries warped, to magically swallow my property into their domain. The gallery murmured. The audacity was breathtaking. If it weren't so insulting, it would have been laughable. To Richard's side, I was no longer a homeowner. I was an outlaw, a blemish on their manicured empire, the renegade threatening their illusion of control. And yet, even as they painted me into a villain, I could see it. The cracks beginning to form, the overreach, the arrogance, the desperation dressed as authority. And I knew. Their parade was already heading for a cliff. Then it was Martha's moment. She stood, shoulders squared, a quiet intensity in her gaze, and pressed a button on her remote. The screens flickered, then erupted in vivid light. Footage filled the room. Richard creeping into my shed under the cover of shadows, slicing through the lock, rifling through my belongings as if he owned them. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Is that you, Mr. Richards?" he asked. Richard's face went pale, lips parting, his voice caught somewhere between denial and panic. Martha didn't waver. She motioned to the county clerk, who stepped up, papers in hand, each page a weapon. Sworn in, he laid out the maps and property deeds with surgical precision. Every line, every boundary, every signature screamed the same truth. My property had never fallen under the HOA's reach. Every fine, every notice, every threat, they were meaningless. The room buzzed, a living thing. Neighbors leaned forward, exchanging glances heavy with vindication, a subtle thrill of justice shared among them. Richard sank into his chair, the empire he'd built on intimidation crumbling in real time, brick by brick. Silence fell for a heartbeat, broken only by the judge's measured nod. In that moment, I realized something deeper than victory. Standing firm, armed with truth and unwavering allies, could topple even the most entrenched forces. The tension dissolved into a charged, exhilarating release, leaving the courtroom and everyone in it forever altered. The judge's gavel slammed down like a thunderclap. Case dismissed. All claims by the HOA are without merit. Counterclaims are upheld. The room seemed to hold its breath for a heartbeat. Then, all at once, Richard's carefully orchestrated campaign of fear and control collapsed. The HOA was ordered to pay damages for harassment and trespass, and Richard himself faced personal fines for breaking into my shed. His face, a volatile mix of shock, fury, and humiliation, was a portrait of defeat. And in that instant, every sleepless night, every pang of anxiety felt vindicated. The aftermath swept through Pine Hollow like a storm. Neighbors who had once cowered in silence stepped forward, recounting tales of Richard's bullying, bogus fines, whispered threats, relentless intimidation. One by one, board members abandoned ship, unwilling to sink with the captain of deceit. Within weeks, the once mighty HOA was reduced to a hollow shell, drained by legal fees, stripped of its authority, and left with nothing but bitter memories of its reign. And in that quiet aftermath, there was a lesson that echoed far beyond the courtroom. Truth, courage, and persistence can topple even the most entrenched power, and those who wield it recklessly will eventually pay the price. I stepped out of the courthouse, the sunlight hitting my face like a benediction. Each breath felt lighter, as if months of tension had been wrung out of me. Neighbors clapped my shoulder, shook my hand, their quiet smiles saying what words never could. We saw it, we felt it, we survived it together. Back at home, I lingered at the shed door, fingers tracing the familiar cedar planks. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, untouched, steadfast. The solar panels glinted in the late afternoon sun, catching light like little trophies of persistence. Richard's empire had collapsed in ruin, but mine, humble, honest, and real, remained unshaken. Now, evenings drift past me on the porch. I watch the sun melt into the horizon, the panels reflecting a soft, steady glow. Dogs curled at my feet, the air thick with quiet. I feel it. Peace reclaimed. Life will always throw people like Richard at you, those who believe rules bend to their will, who push until you buckle or push back. When I moved into that quiet cul-de-sac, all I wanted was peace. After 30 years breaking my back on construction sites, lungs thick with dust, foreman barking until my ears rang, I thought I'd earned it. The house wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, paint flaking, a patch of yard framed by tall maples. But to me it was freedom, paid in full. No mortgage, no boss, no one pulling the reins. The first project was a shed. Simple cedar boards, a sloped roof, squared corners. I sealed the wood until it gleamed, and when I opened the door, the sharp scent of pine rolled out like a promise. Tools in place, mower in the corner, my life organized, tangible. That shed wasn't just storage, it was independence incarnate. Next, I mounted solar panels. They caught the sun, shimmering with quiet defiance. Every law checked, every permit filed. And best of all, the deed confirmed my property lay just outside the HOA's grasp. Freedom, it seemed, was complete. But power-hungry people never sleep. 3 weeks in, a letter landed, the HOA crest embossed on heavy paper. Bold type screamed, "Remove unapproved shed immediately or face daily fines." At first I laughed. They had no jurisdiction. But as the days passed, the envelope seemed to pulse with menace. This wasn't a mistake. It was the opening move. Days later, a second notice arrived. Photographs included. My backyard, my shed, the solar panels glinting like glass in the sun, taken from angles only someone sneaking along the fence could manage. This wasn't about rules. It was surveillance. The letter bit harder now, labeling my structures unsightly violations of community standards. I laughed bitterly. I'd built houses sturdier than half the neighborhood. My shed could weather storms. Those panels weren't scraps. They were precision engineering. Yet to the HOA, they were blight. I called the number at the bottom. A clipped, polished voice answered. I stated calmly, "My property isn't under your HOA jurisdiction. It's in the county records." Her reply was rehearsed. All properties within Pine Hollow must conform to standards. The words slammed into me like a gavel, grip tightening, pulse hammering. I realized this wasn't about rules. It was about power. Fines multiplied. $50, $100, $250 a day. Notices stuffed in mailboxes, shoved under doors, left like markers. And one name rose repeatedly. Richard, HOA president. He patrolled the neighborhood like a tyrant measuring grass, counting fence slats. And now, I had dared to say no. Weeks passed. Harassment grew bolder. Strangers in crisp polos drifted along my property line, clipboards in hand. One morning, a man crouched by the fence, snapping photos. I stormed across the yard, but he fled like a rat. I kept the evidence. Every letter, fine, and photograph stacked in a battered shoebox. Legally meaningless, but heavy with provocation. $10,000 in fines. Each envelope another slap. Each photo a trespass. County records confirmed my deed. My property lay outside the HOA's reach. Logic, law, paper, all on my side. But Richard didn't defend rules. He defended his throne. One evening, I confronted the storm. The HOA office loomed like a courthouse, sterile and intimidating. Behind a desk, Richard sat, silver hair perfect, glasses low, authority radiating. I slammed the deed onto his desk. "Not in your jurisdiction," I said, voice steel. He smirked, eyes cold. "Everyone in this community follows the rules," he said, deliberate, dripping with contempt. It wasn't about the shed. It wasn't about panels. It was about power, and he would not tolerate someone living free beyond his reach. Days later, a notice appeared plastered across my solar panels. "Remove immediately." No courtesy, no statute, just a command. Richard himself arrived later that afternoon, blazer crisp, shoes gleaming. "You'd be smart to quit while you're ahead," he said. "Panels aren't staying." The board has decided I held up my deed like a shield. Not your board. Not your call. "This is my property, boundaries," he muttered, "are flexible when the good of the community is at stake." That word, flexible, hit me like a hammer. Ownership was only what he declared it to be. Silence stretched taut, a test of wills. He turned sharply and left, voice lingering. "You'll regret being this stubborn." That night, I mounted more cameras, wired motion lights, and double-checked locks. Richard wasn't finished. I would not be caught off guard again. 3 nights later, the line was obliterated. A rasping sound woke me, metal scraping against metal. Dogs growled. Flashlight in hand, I crept outside. Inside the shed, a pale beam flickered. Richard, padlock broken, flashlight in hand, rifling through my shelves as though the place belonged to him. My hands trembled, but I didn't shout. I captured every frame, evidence, undeniable. Negotiation was dead. From here on, the battle would be fought in court. I found Martha, a lawyer whose gaze cut like steel. She watched the footage twice, then smiled. Typical HOA overreach. They're banking on you cracking. Cracking isn't an option, I said. By week's end, Martha filed a lawsuit. Trespassing, harassment, property damage, fraudulent fines, every violation documented with surgical precision. Richard was served. He stormed down my street, face red, screaming. I raised my hand toward the blinking security camera, let him vent. The law was on my side. Hope stirred. Neighbors filled the benches. Whispers thick. Richard arrived, 3-piece suit perfect, board members trailing like obedient ducks. His lawyer rose, arm outstretched. This man has erected unsafe, unsightly structures that threaten the community's fabric. Theatrical, practiced, polished. Martha leaned close. Let him dig his own grave. They paraded photos, charts, and maps attempting to swallow my property into their control. But cracks appeared. Overreach, arrogance, desperation. Their parade was heading for a cliff. Martha pressed a button. Screens flickered. Footage. Richard breaking into my shed. Gasps rippled. "Is that you, Mr. Richards?" the judge asked. His face went pale. The county clerk presented deeds proving my property lay outside HOA jurisdiction. Every fine, every notice, every threat, null. Neighbors exchanged glances of vindication. Richard sank in his chair, empire crumbling. I realized, standing firm, armed with truth and allies, could topple even entrenched forces. The gavel slammed. Case dismissed. All claims by the HOA are without merit. Counterclaims are upheld. The HOA was ordered to pay damages. Richard personally fined for trespass. Shock, fury, humiliation painted his face. Neighbors stepped forward, recounting bullying, fines, intimidation. Board members resigned. Within weeks, Pine Hollow's once powerful HOA was a hollow shell. I stepped out of the courthouse, sunlight blessing me, neighbors patting my back. At home, the shed was intact. Solar panels glinted, freedom reclaimed. Evenings drift by on the porch. Dogs curled at my feet, air thick with quiet. Life will always throw people like Richard at you. Those who push until you fold or fight back. My shed, my panels, they were my line in the sand, and I held it. The lesson: your shed might be your time, your dignity, your peace. Whatever it is, guard it. Reinforce it. When someone tries to take it, stand firm. Fight. Respect is earned, and sometimes it's won in court.